everybody. Welcome to another episode of Review K, where this time we have concluded our month of playing Spider-Man Miles Morales, and it's time for our review, and so let's just dive into it. So, first thing we always talk about in our reviews are the aesthetics of the game and the level design, where in this case, it's an open world game. It's based in New York. As someone who's played the first Spider-Man game, I do like how they kind of don't focus so much on like the Manhattan aspect of it. They focus on Harlem, especially in this game, and it just feels like when I play this game compared to the other Spider-Man game, I get a different sense of culture, a different sense of neighborhood and family and stuff like that than I did with the other one. Not saying the other one wasn't as good, but it felt like a nice, unique spin. I didn't feel like I was really playing, this is just a 1.5, leading up to the next Spider-Man sequel. I felt like, no, this is a unique, genuinely different Spider-Man experience. I felt just from an overall just aesthetic point and from a level design point as well.
I think that the spaces themselves, I didn't play the first one, but as someone who has lived in New York City for a very long period of time, I can say that they did a very good job of representing the space of Harlem and making it feel like you were in fact in, though it's a alternate / futuristic version of it, it still maintained the spaces very well. So I think they did an excellent job in recreating a lot of the iconic visuals of the neighborhood, the borough of real life. Not really I don't know how to really explain Harlem, but it is a neighborhood / borough. They did an excellent job of making it feel like Harlem. This is a Spider-Man game, so verticality, spaces that sort of utilize the specific superpower abilities. I think they did an excellent job of capturing sort of the way in which Spider-Man exists and functions within a space, but that's more gameplay than it is aesthetic. The scene where we were infiltrating to go and get to that sort of power core area and find that phone, I liked the level design. I felt like they did a great job in that space, utilizing, because normally you're seeing Spider-Man swing from building to building. This is a close quarters, indoors, underground space. They did a great job of making the vents feel, useful, and how he utilizes the space. I think they did a good job of designing levels that weren't just open spaces.
Yeah.
So that's my
yeah, like when you're crawling through the vents, and last thing I'll say about the level designs, the aesthetic is just, when you're crawling through the vents of Roxxon and you have to stop the fan, and it's like, you're using his web powers to stop fans, and just so you can go around and maneuver through the mission and through the building. Yeah, I thought it was a really, really good job. And from there, let's move on to the controls. So I'm going to start this off with you, because this is, of course, your first time playing these types of Spider-Man games. So what was your overall opinion of just the combat system, the web swinging, all that stuff?
There is a lot of ways in which you can execute things and ways in which you can play, so I do appreciate that. As somebody who's never played a Spider-Man game from Insomniac like this, I did appreciate the swath of options for how I can take down opponents. I think that they provide a lot of intricacy and the things that you can do when it comes to combat, which only allows for Spider-Man to feel his combat to feel more enriched, I would say. There's just something about being able to swing an object into somebody, or to steal their gun, or to power, do a venom punch. There's a lot of options when it comes to how a fight is executed. I will say, initially, it was a little overwhelming to have so many different things to juggle. It's one of those, once you get used to the control scheme, you're gonna be able to pull off a bunch of crazy and fun web slinging things.
I think in terms of the controls, I can understand how, if you're new to this type of a game, how it can be overpowering, and it just feels like a lot to do, like you said, lots of things to juggle, a lot of maneuvers to be able to have to pull off and stuff. I haven't played the Arkham games before going to a Spider-Man game. Really, I think does help, because it's kind of the same type of fighting style where you have a bunch of enemies around you, and your spider sense goes up. When that goes up, you hit triangle button and you evade it, or circle, or whatever have you. I think in terms of the control aspect, the Venom abilities, I really liked how they were easy to do. It was just L1 and then press this circle, or press this button, basically. Those are actually, of course, new to this version. And I like that what they did was, in the previous version, I felt there was too many gadgets. Again, going back to my talk of Ghost of Tsushima, where I was like, yeah, there's so many different items and things and weapons I can use, but I only just really use my sword the entire time. Whereas this was like, I found myself using the gadgets more because there were less of them, and because I felt like they actually served a purpose. Where like, yeah, if I have a bunch of enemies around me, it's important to be able to shoot holographic fighters out that aid me in battle for a short period of time. And again, I like the fact that by hitting up on the D-pad, you can go invisible, and you can get away. Where if you're around too many people, it becomes too much for you. Just go invisible for a little bit, swing up to a light post, and just recollect yourself, and you're all set. Control-wise, I like how simplistic in a sense they were for an open world, like fighting combat type of game. And yeah, I think that they really did a really good job of that. I think they really did a really good job of incorporating the Venom moves, where it's nice. And I like the fact too of like, it makes you think of like, okay, I have my Venom move available because I have the 2 bars filled up. I can either unleash this Venom move on this person, or I can just go down the D-pad and fill up my health. What do I do? So the controls, in a way, I feel are accessible, but they also make you think of like strategy. Like, okay, if I press my fingers on these 2 buttons here, I can get rid of this enemy. Or, hey, I'm at like half health. Do I really need to? Should I maybe go try to get the full health? So, in a way, it makes you just think of like, oh man, if I press like one wrong button, I mean, it's happened multiple times. I'm like, I'm so into a fight because I'm like controlling, jumping, invading, and pressing these buttons and everything like that. I forget, oh, I'm at low health, therefore I'm dead. So, it's very, very fluid. I like the fluidity of the combat system.
Ultimately, my note is that if you are not experienced in these games, that there is a reasonable learning curve to get into the mechanics. But additionally, let's talk about the control remapping, the button remapping. They do an excellent job of setting an executable standard in this game. The options overall for what this game is able to do is exactly what games should be providing for games of this like moving forward, in my opinion.
Well, yeah, especially with a property as big as Spider-Man, with a company as big as Marvel and Sony. This is a first-party game. This is a game they're building their base around to say, hey, buy a PS5, or hey, if you're on a PS4, like, hey, there's something you can also enjoy. I really, again, enjoy the fact that they did put full button remapping, which we've said time and time again in our reviews, should be in every AAA game. There's no reason why it shouldn't. So I think that when I look at like the button remapping, yeah, you can go and change your swinging, you can change all that stuff, and then you get welcome with the accessibility menu. And this is why I really like the Spider-Man games in general. It's just because the first Spider-Man game was the first time I'd ever opened a game and I immediately met with an accessibility menu. I don't have to search it out. I don't have to go into the options and go over a few tabs and hit accessibility, and I get to accessibility and I'm underwhelmed by it. I liked in this game how they took the first accessibility menu from the first game and were like, okay, it's a few years later, how can we build on this? And they did. They have it to where instead of just having to hold down a button for a QTE so you can perform a move, you can just skip them. You can just skip QTEs. You can highlight enemies in different colors, different characters in different colors. That way you can be like, okay, this person is green, they're a good person, they're an ally. Well, this person's red, so anybody who's labeled red, I should just attack. And that helps. And that's something that a lot of companies, a lot of studios should keep in mind of like, okay, we have this accessibility menu, or we had this in the game X amount of years ago. How can we build on that, and how can we improve it? And just looking at like all the different various options. I mean, you can go back to our first episode. We just go through pretty much every one of them, and you can just show and highlight all of them. I felt like they did a really good job with their level of accessibility in this game.
Yeah, it is a standard by which games should have available options. It's seemingly not that hard. Now, granted, Insomniac has the backing of Sony.
Right, yes.
A ton of money. But it does not seem, especially with my note of how sometimes the controller scheme can seem complex, it does not seem out of the realm of possibilities for games that have simpler control schemes to provide such an option. I give them, the little gold sticker of accessibility approval for the effort that they put into ensuring that the game was at least accessible in the sense of, controller remapping is huge, and it's necessary in the modern age.
Well, especially with a game like Spider-Man, or really any superhero game, where there are people who have a disability, and I've been one of these people where I would look at my disability, and I'm like, man, I can never play Spider-Man in the movie. There's certain characters I just can't do for whatever reason, and being able to sit down and play a Spider-Man game where I have the power to change the controls to my needs and to my specifications, really pulls me deep into the game and really makes me feel like I am Spider-Man. There are times where, like, during my first playthrough of the game, where I'm swinging and the world around me just kind of like falls away, and I'm really pulled into this game. Now, there are parts of the game where I felt really were kind of not the greatest thing that they carried over from the first game, where a lot of the missions are the same, a lot of, the crimes you stop are the same, like 5 things, whereas it's like, there are ways you can maybe introduce things to spice them up a little bit, where, maybe instead of every type of a carjacking, it's not the same looking car, like you have like a van you can stop, or an SUV, or a semi-truck, or something like that. Just doing those little things really could go a long way. At first it's like, oh, it's cool, I'm stopping this crime. Then you're like, well, if I gotta stop another mugging, or I gotta stop another thing.
I wonder how many guys will be on this rooftop
exactly
to smack down that are trying to block some signal for some guy. I would also agree, it did not necessarily feel like each side mission or world event-esque sort of mission didn't really ever feel like there was uniqueness or newness to it. It's sort of an unfortunate side effect of where we are currently, technologically speaking. But there are games that have existed before this that have had more creativity in their options than it, and I feel like it is a little bit of a not necessarily a cop-out, but it is a bit of a cop-out to not necessarily up the uniqueness of each encounter. Put something unique to earn when you are fighting these guys. You know what I mean? There could be a little bit more love put into those world events. I
totally agree with you on that, because there's a point where you max out XP and all your stuff's pretty much maxed out, and it's like, oh, here's these points, or these things you can get from stopping crime. I'm like, well, I'm kind of maxed out here.
I don't really have an incentive to do so.
There's one costume you can unlock. You can only unlock it by just playing a new game plus. Like, once you start a new game plus, it's like unlocked basically. Again, I don't think they're playing on any DLC for it, because it is a 1.5. But it's just one of those things where, it's like, oh, it's the same people on the same building, and they're doing the same type of things. How many times are they going
to get out of the hospital and start committing crime again in this city,
it just
knowing full well Spider-Man is going to kick their ass?
It just felt like going back to the first game, where it's like, okay, so instead of the Sable Army and Mr. Negative's gang, it's, hey, instead of Silver Sable, it's Roxxon, and instead of, I believe they were called the Demons, instead of the Demons, it's the Underground. And it's just like new paint over something that already existed.
A mechanic that already existed.
Yeah.
They could update the flavor.
Yeah, now I'm not saying the fights like with the Underground weren't bad, because it's like they had, they're tech-based, and so a lot of their, they have, like, for example, like the first time going against the person with the sword, I was like, oh, wow, like, the sword isn't just a thing that they swing at you, like, it can grab you. It's like Ivy from Soul Calibur's weapon, basically.
Yeah.
But it wasn't
then
enough.
It becomes,
yeah.
Oh, well, there's 2 sword guys and a couple of blockers, and, there isn't, I understand that they incrementally introduce variety, but there's nothing new about the way in which the fight functions, right?
Exactly.
The way in which it's just like they introduce new enemy. Now new enemy is standard for fight. You know, I feel like other open world games have done a better job at creating those unique experiences in the open world outside of. I mean, missions are great. I'll give them credit where credit is due. I liked infiltrating the underground, and I liked being able to go into that, you know, the vents and do that mission where you're inside of that sort of reactor room. I really, you know, those spaces are fun and unique, but they could have spent more time making each of the fights in the open world that are just instance events of, you know, these guys are trying to block a signal, that sort of thing, a little bit less repetitive.
Yeah, and so with that, just real quick, how do you think, going back to the accessibility stuff, how do you think the accessibility could be increased in a game like this?
Ultimately, I feel like they have done exactly the sort of the things that need to be in a game in order to provide accessibility. Ultimately, and it's sort of reflected in my grade, they did exactly what they should be doing. If there were opportunities to improve or add even more options that I'm unaware of, that's when it would earn a much higher rating for me. I feel like this game provides exactly the amount of accessibility options we should expect from games presently.
Yeah, I think one of the things I would like to see happen is maybe make the finishers, instead of having to press like triangle and circle at the same time, maybe have like a one button finisher. Let's get to our grades. And so I'll go first. For me, I cannot give this a 5. I can't, because as much as the accessibility is great, overall the gameplay, I felt like the web swing was fun. I like the animation when Miles is swinging. He swings like somebody who has not been Spider-Man for a long time. There's not a certain sense of like veteranness to his movements or his swing, which I really adore. But overall, just with the gameplay, where I'm like, yeah, I feel like, oh, instead of fighting these two factions, I'm fighting these two factions. The same thing. Oh, there's 5 different Sable bases. It's 5 different Roxxon bases or Roxxon things.
The enemy received just kind of a new coat of paint.
It's a press start for me. This is a game where I think that because of its level of accessibility, even though there are parts of it that are very repetitive or stuff that are like just painted over from the first game, this is something that you can just fire up, download, put the disc in however you play, and immediately get into, because it has that full-on accessibility menu to where I feel like it caters to a lot of different types of disabilities. And it was one of those games where I'm like, yeah, how could this thing be very much more accessible? Like, what things? You know, there might not be some things that I'm aware of in terms of accessibility that could be added to a game, but I felt like, yeah, outside of the whole finisher thing, I'm like, I feel like they kind of like hit that, not the ceiling, but if they've like hit that top peak part, where now it's like, okay, how can we go into the sky? And I'm like, I'm not sure what the sky contains.
The sky's got a lot of things in it that we're not aware of.
Right.
It's sort of like in the first time a shooter ever implemented a sliding mechanic. Whoa, what is this? You know, it's there are mechanics and things that will be discovered along the way. I think this game sets a standard for a way in which games should be able to put accessibility in their game. I agree with you on the repetitiveness of enemies or mission types or those open world events. I think it's very, very visually beautiful. I also would give this game a press start. It's easy to get into. Learning curve, in my opinion, if you haven't played it, that's my disclaimer, is if you have not played a game like this before, there is a learning curve. But once you get into it, the combat flows and functions exactly how you would like to see Spider-Man flow and function. The N64 games were great, but they didn't really feel like Spider-Man. It was sort of, here is Blockman who shoots web. You feel the sort of acrobatic nature of the character in this. And we talked about how they captured the superpowers really well in one of our episodes, and how maybe they could execute the same thing with other heroes, etc. And I feel like they did a very good job of making Spider-Man feel like Spider-Man, and that this Spider-Man felt like this specific Spider-Man. So I'd give it a press start as well. I think that in order to earn any higher rating, they'd have to put things in there that revolutionize the standards of accessibility for me. You know, I think that they did an excellent job of creating it, but they didn't do anything beyond my wildest hopes and dreams for accessibility.
And that's going to do it for our review of Spider-Man Miles Morales. Hope you enjoyed our content, and if you do, be sure to hit that subscribe button down below. And also be sure to hit the bell icon so when a new video goes up every Sunday and Wednesday, you get notifications saying, hey, a new video is here for your viewing pleasure. Be sure to follow us on social media, facebook.com/ReviewCade. We're also on Twitter and on Instagram @ReviewCade as well. And hey, thank you very much. We enjoyed it. We'll see you in January with a brand new game.
Bye! Next time on Reviewcade.